First, let's look at workflows. Out of the box, you'll find that you have three primary groups of workflows: the approval workflow, the three-step workflow, and if you've upgraded SharePoint from a previous version, specifically 2010, but you'll have come through that if you've got an earlier version, you'll have some SharePoint 2010 workflows. Just as a note, the reason why you'll have the SharePoint 2010 workflows is because SharePoint, the workflow engine in SharePoint, was extensively redone between 2010 and 2013. So SharePoint has the ability to run the old workflow engine for SharePoint 2010 workflows. This is a very nice backward compatibility feature, but just note that that's something that you would need to look at if you still have those workflows with an eye towards future compatibility. Going forward, it's not expected for that capability to continue. So if you've got 2010 workflows, looking at what you need to do to move them to at least 2013 would be highly recommended. Which brings us to the custom workflows. There are many people who use SharePoint workflows extensively, and there are many people who do not. Most of the time, I recommend that custom workflows are to be used in organizations that have a good understanding of process, that maybe have a process improvement group, or that have their business processes very well documented. The reason for that is that SharePoint workflows can help you actually bring those processes into your sites and automate them so that you don't have to do as much manual. Workflows can do everything from sending emails to updating information inside of SharePoint lists to routing approvals to actually moving information to different areas depending upon what metadata is associated with it. So you can do a lot in SharePoint workflows that you might ordinarily put in custom development or actually have to buy other applications for. And it's generally fairly easy to manage, to update, to keep in sync with your business processes. So definitely look at custom workflows in SharePoint for implementation into your site. Document templates are another item that most people know a little bit about, but don't consider quite so much putting it into their SharePoint site. Large organizations tend to, smaller a little bit less. These templates can provide the templates for new Office documents. So if you're adding a new document in your document library, you can actually set it up to use your standard company template for Word or PowerPoint or whatever you'd like to do. It actually makes it very simple to go in and keep your templates synchronized all around your organization. If you've actually used enterprise templates for your organization, you'll know that it either requires pushing down lots of files to individual machines and keeping those up to date and making sure everyone has the current one, setting up a network share so that you can have everybody pointing to it as if it's the file system, or figuring a way to have them manually pull down new templates and install them in the correct directories, which is none of those are generally very good solutions. Being able to put it in SharePoint gives you a central repository, but also gives you versioning on those templates. So you can actually know when new templates are in place, make sure that you can actually go back to previous templates if you need to, just by using versioning, actually doing some revision and doing some work in place, and then just approving a major version, and your new template goes out over your entire organization. So there's a lot of benefits for using the templates. And as I say, often it's just looking at Word, but you can actually have any Office document, such as PowerPoint, have those templates in place and be able to use those. You can use those just in your site, or your organization may actually make a repository for your enterprise templates across your organization. When you're working with the forms pages, the entry for any of the lists that you're looking at, look at how you put those together. In the example I did just in the previous module, we pulled up a connectable web part that could actually provide a row. SharePoint can have web parts that can provide single columns or single items, that can send rows, that can send groups of rows. So there's a lot of things that can happen with the connectable web parts. Things such as being able to do content filtering, actually having custom queries to be able to pull up information from different information silos and actually put them together on the page itself. So those form pages can actually not just bring in information, but actually gather it together and actually have it interact with each other using connectable web parts. Very few organizations I've seen have really taken advantage of connectable web parts. Really dig into it. There's a lot of power there, and you can actually make entire web apps that are very responsive just by connecting a couple of web parts together. Looking at the editing the forms, again with the demo we put in some additional information for your users. Anytime they anytime they want to enter in an item, they could get additional text that you wanted to put in. You could actually have it look up additional content that's context sensitive. You can actually format it to whatever way that works best for your users. So going in and updating those forms, the default ones are really nice. But you can actually do a lot with that to really expand it out and make it something that your organization can work well with. And then future proofing. As you're going through, consider how your organization is going to continue working with these forms. A lot of times people will look at using the forms with InfoPath. Again, I've mentioned it a couple of times for this course, InfoPath's going away. So the more you can actually work with the forms pages as web pages rather than inside your client applications, the more future-proof you're going to be, because the capabilities of the desktop are actually moving faster into the SharePoint hosted pages than vice versa. Then that content in SharePoint is moving back to the client. So just be aware of that as you're looking through it and figuring out where you want to go with that. And SharePoint Designer. I mentioned SharePoint Designer when we were looking through that, when we were working through the settings earlier, but do realize that SharePoint Designer is something as an owner you should be looking at, your designers should be looking at it, and possibly your power users. There's no license fee right now for SharePoint Designer 2013. It actually, that was dropped a while back, and it's a tool custom built to provide that client capability of really getting under the hood with SharePoint and giving you good capabilities. It's excellent for editing pages. Its roots come from front page, and while the original front page may not have output the best standards compliant HTML, with SharePoint 2013 and the push for compliance, not only are you looking at compliant HTML for all the browsers, but you're actually looking at something that's very customized to do SharePoint work, and do it in a way that will keep your SharePoint farm functioning very well. It is also one of the easiest ways to work with the workflows. You can actually go into SharePoint and you can do some pieces. You can actually do custom development with workflows. You can actually do some workflow work with Visio if you've got that installed on the desktop. But just know that SharePoint Designer is kind of built from the ground up to make it easy to do workflows. So if you're looking at those, at least install SharePoint Designer and give it a spin. Just make sure you see what you've got. And then there's designing. Because SharePoint Designer is built for editing SharePoint, it actually has the capability of working with all of your asset libraries, with actually putting everything in the right place with your SharePoint implementation so that it'll come into the right location, that you'll have everything under the proper control, that you won't have files falling all over the place. They'll actually be in the right location. So if you've got designers who aren't used to working with SharePoint Designer and you have SharePoint, this is the tool they really need to be using rather than maybe some other HTML design tools. And then there's HTML itself. Again, with SharePoint 2013 really pushing for web standards, HTML5, really pushing to be able to work cross-browser, not just desktop browsers, but mobile browsers. SharePoint Designer does produce very reasonable HTML. So if you have your designers working with not just SharePoint, but maybe some other custom sites, you can actually use the tool for that as well. So it's one of those that it's a nice Swiss Army knife. It's no license fee, and it's something that's probably you should look at and determine if it's worth working with the organization. Then there are the services. There's a lot of services behind SharePoint, and we kind of looked through some of the SharePoint solutions and features as we went through the demo. But I'll mention a couple that are kind of interesting that have kind of come through SharePoint, through Office 365, and back again. And that's things such as the access services, being able to actually take an access database, push it up into SharePoint, and operate it in a very scalable and robust manner. One of the big benefits of Access is that it's very accessible for power users to create their own applications. I've talked with many organizations that their entire sales department runs off an Access database. Seeing less of that now, but it's had a historical trend, and that's because the person who has learned how to do Access and actually has the ability to make a very nice application tends to recommend it to others. The challenge with that is that Access does not scale that well beyond department level, and being able to put it into SharePoint and actually scale that process, those forums, all the rest of the things that you're used to with Access becomes very, very valuable and very useful. There's the Excel services, the ability to actually have SharePoint host your Excel files and be able to have a web editing tool. As you're looking at the data grid, as you're looking at some of the different ways to slice and dice data, you're actually using Excel services in there. So get familiar with it, get comfortable with it. If your organization works with a lot of tabular data, you'll probably want to dig a little deeper into Excel services and see where you can use it. But just know that it's built in and very nice. Visio services are something that I've really not seen many organizations pick up on. A lot of it's because I think that Visio is a pretty specialized application, but if you've got people who are doing processes, who are doing a lot of flow charting and kind of technical drawing, Visio services inside of SharePoint can actually make that a lot more accessible, can actually solve a lot of problems you run with Visio, which is needing to have a viewer for the custom file types. SharePoint can actually render that on the web page itself. That has a twofold benefit of you don't need to make sure that you have custom readers on all the different desktops. And the second is that you can actually control the Visio drawings a lot easier, being able to have them so that they're not pushed down. You can actually ensure that they are just rendered into the web page. And it makes things nice and simple for maintaining security on the Visio drawings. And then InfoPath. InfoPath is both a product and a group of technologies. What we're looking at is that InfoPath is currently supported working with SharePoint, be able to create rich forums, to be able to enter in data even in an offline mode and then synchronize it up with SharePoint, being able to work with a very nice detailed view in SharePoint. But just note that InfoPath is going away. We've been told that InfoPath technologies will continue and the forms technologies will work, but it will likely be in a different format than what we're seeing today with InfoPath itself. So keep an eye on InfoPath. Actually use the forms that we were talking about earlier, editing, which are InfoPath technologies, but the InfoPath client is probably something that you're going to be less reliant upon moving forward.